Welcome to the ThiqueThoughts post-Olympics game show, where we're going to just talk about how I thought the Olympics went. The Olympics are a huge deal for our sport because it's really a way for us to showcase to the whole world why climbing is so cool and what sets us apart from the other sports that are included in these games, but also sports that people watch every day. I always think when I watch football, man, I wish I was watching climbing. So I wish that other people could feel that way. There is some amount of bias, probably, that I love climbing because I do it a lot. But realistically, when I have taken climbing, like non-climbing people to climbing competitions, they have a great time. And it's actually not that complicated. It's like whoever gets to the top more often wins. So it's not as like, oh, well, if he steps out of here, then it's like an offsides or blah, blah, blah. Like there's not all these complicated rules. It's really straightforward. This could be a sport that's easily accessible to the masses. And it's also freaking awesome. Like you're barely holding on by your fingertips. Man, like climbing should have a huge fan base. And this is our chance to show the world that it is awesome. And for the most part, I think they nailed it. Let's just take one moment to talk about how hard it was to be in the elite group of climbers that actually could compete at the Olympics. Only 20 were selected, and it was a relatively convoluted process to be one of those 20. I don't want to go through all the rules. You can read about it somewhere else, but needless to say, even as a diehard fan, I had a hard time understanding. On top of that, if you were unfortunate enough to be coming from climbing Mecca like Japan, your path to the Olympics was even more uncertain. I am incredibly proud of the Olympians who did qualify, and I think that they represent some of the best in our sport. Today we're going to mostly talk about the women's combined final. And before we talk about the finalists, I want to talk about a few honorable mentions who perhaps I thought would have made the final. To start, let's talk about Natalia Grossman. I'm American. I was really hoping that we'd have both of our American women qualify because they both were capable of qualifying. Unfortunately, Natalia had a relatively bad knee injury in a Salt Lake City Bouldering World Cup leading up to the Olympics, and I think it really disrupted some of her training physically, but also her headspace. I was still surprised that she didn't make the final, and I would have liked to see her there. Next, I want to mention Miho Nanaka, who was the 2020-2021 Olympian who took the silver medal, beating out legend Akio Noguchi, and overall just an incredible climber, both on plastic and on the rock. She has been seeing a little bit of a dip in her performance, so I wasn't entirely surprised that she didn't make the final, but I was sad. Okay, there are 12 athletes that I could talk about here. I'm talking about 3. But Laura Rigora is worth mentioning because in some ways she is a prodigy of the sport, and some of the things that she's done on both stone and in competitions pretty much 3 years ago were groundbreaking, or at least at the highest end of the sport. But yeah, didn't quite have it in the tank. I'm going to give you what I thought could happen to the best of my knowledge. I'm going to go 8th to 1st place. This is how my prediction of the ordering of the final when all things are done. Okay, let's get into it. So starting off in 8th place, I'm putting Chaeyeon So. Chaeyeon So is a Korean climber. She has been doing well. She consistently makes finals in both disciplines, but I also think that her performance has been lackluster the last couple years. And I think that is in part because she's been trying to be good at lead and bouldering at the same time, where historically she's been a lead specialist. She's one of the few people to have beaten Yanya Gombrich at lead, but I don't think she quite has what it takes to be in the top half of this final. Hey! Moving on to 7th place, we have Emily McNeice. She's a Great Britain athlete. She's 20 years old. From where I'm sitting, Emily McNeice is a dark horse coming to this competition. She qualified dominantly in the Olympic qualifying series, but on the other hand, She doesn't have quite as many World Cup medals as some of the other finalists, and so I believe that she probably won't finish in the top half of this final. All right, in sixth, I have a relatively hot take putting Jessica Pills. Jessica Pills did well to qualify, coming in second at the first Olympic qualifying event, the World Championships last year, which means that she's had a lot of time to train and peak for this event, which could be seen as an advantage. But from my perspective, she has not been as consistent as she should have been in the last couple years on the World Cup scene, and I don't think that she is in her peak form. I think that Jessica Pill's best days are behind her. I'm ranking Oceana McKenzie in fifth. She hails from Australia, and I think Oceana McKenzie is slept on. You have to think about how much of an advantage the rich Western European countries and Japanese, and to a lesser extent Americans, have over competitors from countries like Australia. There's just a higher density of climbers in the places that I mentioned. And while there are good coaches and good climbers in Australia, it's just almost like the water cooler effect. Having more and more climbers around you that are super talented pushes you to become better. These Olympic level climbers, they have had training partners that have allowed them to develop faster. All that being said, Oceana McKenzie is in the fucking final. Like, who is she? When she qualified for the Olympic Series in the Oceana Olympic qualifying event, I think she missed like 1/10 of a point or something like that. It was ungodly. She was like, none of these climbs are even hard enough for me at the Olympic qualifying event. Ugh. Okay. Red Bull, pick her up, please. God, somebody pay her to do this. In fourth, again, maybe a hot take, I put Ai Mori in fourth. I really don't think that Ai Mori has been doing enough competitions in the last couple of years to be sharp in her skills. And also, I don't think Ai Mori will do well at the Olympic level in particular, because the setting crew is trying to showcase the sport, which lends itself to a more TV-friendly setting style, which includes jumps. And Ai Mori is not the most dynamic climber. So that's why I'm putting her in fourth. I'm putting Brooke Rabatou in third, partially because I am a biased American and I want one of my American girls to be on the podium. I do think that Brooke is an excellent climber, and she could, on her best day ever, be on the podium. In second, I'm putting Orion Bertone. Orion had a huge hometown advantage. She's from Paris. She's been climbing well in France her whole life. She climbed V14 at age 12 in Fontainebleau. That's not even like an hour away, depending on which climb you're going to. She should be like good to go. Janja Gombrett is beyond the obvious choice. You don't have to be a climber, a statistician, or even literate to know that she's the GOAT. She is going to win this competition, and it's really hers to lose. I'm a huge Janja fan. Something that's like an interesting theme around this Olympics that I've heard from some people is that the women's field is not as interesting to watch because Janja is competing, which is bogus, because if we look at other sports like gymnastics or swimming, where we have Simone Biles and Katie Ledecky, or even if we go back 10 years, we can think about Lindsey Vonn and ski racing. Those sports were revitalized by the likes of those superstars. And our sport is getting a huge boost by having this generational or perhaps all-time talent from Janja Gombrett. And it really makes a huge difference to have someone of that caliber competing in our sport. And we should all be grateful, and we should all be gripping our chairs as we watch her at every competition. It's like watching someone do what they're born to do. So let's go through the results now and see how bad I am at my job. Okay, so everyone who is watching this should have watched the final, so spoiler alert if you haven't watched it, but you should go watch it. The boulder round comes first, and then they finish everything off with the lead. So coming into the boulder, everyone was climbing relatively well, except like Ai Mori and to a lesser extent Orion Bertone. I think you could make an argument that Cheon So also underperformed because she was in 8th place, the last place after the boulder round. But Cheon is a lead specialist, and so I would have thought she would have been in the bottom half of this anyway, so I'm not entirely surprised. But yeah, Orion really needed to do boulder number 3, and she didn't get any points. She is a bouldering specialist historically. Orion coming out of the boulder round in 4th, while it doesn't sound like a bad deal, because of how many points she actually is behind Brooke and Yanya, now she has to somehow outperform Yanya on lead, which just was never going to happen. I think that something that I didn't really consider is like how much pressure Orion was under. She was climbing at the same time as Yanya, and Yanya was coming behind her because Yanya qualified ahead of her in the semifinal, and they were time aligned. So every time that Orion was bouldering, Yanya was also right there behind her. So she had the knowledge that Yanya was doing boulders, like the same boulders that she just tried like 4 minutes ago. Yanya was doing them faster, and then on top of that, you could hear the whole French crowd screaming, Orion, Orion. And like even on the slab climb, like have you ever tried to do a slab when someone's yelling at you? It sounds awful. So to me, that sounds like an awful experience. So Orion, like, I felt bad for her because she was climbing well, but these sort of intangible factors were getting to her. So we go into the lead. Orion falls early and ends up finishing in 8th. We see Oceana McKenzie also fall early, even though she had a relatively good bouldering round. She comes in 7th. Cheon So climbs well on lead, but it's not enough to make up for her bouldering. McNeese climbs pretty well in both, but finishes in 5th, not quite being able to break into the top half of the final. We're seeing Ai Mori, unfortunately, just even though she's a brilliant lead climber, it wasn't enough to make up for the fact that she just never chose to prepare to jump. Like, if someone should fire Ai Mori's coach. Like, did they not think that she was going to have to jump? This is the Olympics. I'm blown away that she didn't come into this competition in a different form. She's such a talented climber, and she's obviously great in the style that she's great at. But if you could have seen these challenges from a mile away, and she had 2 years to prepare. Realistically, like, people knew that she was going to qualify for the Olympics 2 years ago. And if we think about how much she has progressed in that dynamic style over the last 2 years, it's almost not at all. So I'm disappointed, not necessarily in Ai, but more in the people that are helping her become the best athlete that she can. Out of nowhere, Jessica Pills is on the podium, like a renaissance of Jessica Pills. My friends have been making fun of me, saying that I should never have slept on Jessica, that she is as good as it gets, and they're right. Of course, she's been world champion before. She's won she's been on the podium of both bouldering and lead World Cups. So she does have what it takes. And she demonstrated it here, and she demonstrated that she can peak for the day. Like, I think she had some of the most inspirational climbing that I've seen out of her in her entire life at the Olympics, which is really cool because there is a ton of pressure. Brooke Rabatou climbed out of her mind, coming in 2nd. I don't think people understand how impressive this is, because Brooke, given she comes from a climbing dynasty, given she's had like pretty much the best training that someone could possibly get, but you can't discount that she's just realistically not the right make and model for competition climbing. She's just a few inches too short. And I get that that's not an excuse, and it like isn't in some ways, but it really is at the competition level, because the setters in general are setting for the average body type, and Brooke is not the average. She is smaller, and so she's done an incredible amount of work to prepare for this competition. Juxtaposing her to Aimori, we saw them having relatively similar body types and styles, arguably 2 years ago, and Brooke has completely leveled up in her dynamic style. It is inspiring. I am so proud that she's from my country. Yeah, go Brooke. And then finally, Yanya. I mean, it really was her competition to lose. I think it was interesting to watch her climb because she climbed so stiff. And at least how I look at it, she climbed almost the worst she's ever climbed and still won, which is crazy because she made some mistakes in the boulder round, which she doesn't normally do. And she didn't have the best lead out of the whole competition. And she can be the best lead climber on any given day. And she usually is, if we go back and we look at what she's capable of in her previous climbing results. So I'm just astounded by like how even on a mediocre or a subpar day from Yanya that she's still this dominant. It really demonstrates that she is the GOAT. I also think I underestimated how much mental pressure there would have been from her coming into this to defend her title. She was climbing not as loose. It really was reminiscent of like Simone Biles in the last Olympics, where Simone had to end up dropping out because the pressure was too much and she was having mental health crisis. So yeah, I'm really proud of Yanya. I'm like very grateful to be alive during this time when we get to watch someone who is this talented in their prime live. Yeah, blown away. I want to talk a little bit before we close up about the whole event, in particular about how good the production of this competition was. It is so rare to get a climbing competition where the stream is this good. If you are a climbing fan like me, then you have sat through and right arrowed your way through tons of YouTube streams to just get to the part where there's actually the climbing that you want to watch. And I didn't have to think about that at all. I completely forgot that there was some woman behind the curtain that was editing and that there were videographers and the cameramen. It just magically was happening, and I was immersed in the event through my TV screen. And that's how sports should be, for God's sake. And yeah, so I was blown away by that. Also, I really want to give a shout out to the commentators. I listened to Petra Klinger and the talking head from NBC, and I know that some people weren't perfectly satisfied with their performance, but for me, I was impressed that they did as good of a job as they did when they're in this unenviable position of both talking to someone who is from Cincinnati and only does baseball and has never thought about climbing ever, and then they're also trying to talk to like hardcore climber people that they drink and breathe this and that they followed every single climbing competition ever. I thought that they threaded that needle as best as humanly possible, just speaking to all the demographics. To close, just the importance of the combined event. There is a hardcore climbing fan community. There's a sense that the combined event doesn't really measure anything. And it's a way for us to get our foot in the door into the Olympics, but what even is a combined event? And I hear you, but there's a deep history in climbing of being good at all things at once, whether it's in outdoor events or even when Adam Ondra won both the World Championship in lead and boulder in the same year. That really cemented that period as a time when Adam was completely dominant. And I think that the combined event really is a great showcase of who is the best climber. Because in some ways, bouldering and lead are different, but in other ways, they're just two sides of the same coin. And if you're a complete climber, then you can do both. And the people who can't do both, they're usually not the top tier athletes. So that's my 2 cents. I was overall blown away by the Olympics. I hope you were too. Please hit the comments and tell me what you thought about the event. Tell me that you disagreed with me. Tell me that you agreed with me. Hope to hear from you. Bye.